Beshah sha'ala Moshe lamorim. When Moshe Rabbeinu went up to heaven, Omru Malachi Ashar Zefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Malachim started to complain why Hashem Yisbarach is giving the Torah to people, and the Eibishter told Moshe Rabbeinu to answer, and Moshe Rabbeinu had to answer. This Maamar is incredibly difficult. It's a very, very difficult Maamar. It's a very, very deep Maamar. But we're going to try. We're going to try and navigate through this Maamar. I don't know yet how many classes this is going to take. I don't know yet how I'm going to be dividing up the Maamar into parts. And I certainly don't know yet whether, when we're done, we can say that the Maamar has been made more clear or more involved, more entangled, more confused. We're going to try. The first thing is, as we often do when we learn in these classes, is we don't learn the Maamar in order, from the beginning to the end. We learn the Maamar in the order that I choose. And it is, to many people, not correct. A Maamar Chassidus has to be learned the way the Rebbe gave it. And I'm not trying to make myself justified, but as the Gemara says, the Lashon Teirehi v'lilmad anitzara. The point is to learn and understand, and I'm hoping that by structuring the classes, the limud, the way we're structuring it, it will benefit people in understanding the Maamar as a whole. There is an old expression that probably goes back to the times of the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim, which is recorded in the Akdama, in the Sefer, in the Kuntris, I think it's called Limud Chassidus, which tells the story. The Friedrich gets a letter from the Friedrich Rebbe, from the previous Rebbe, where he tells the story of Rebbe Kushya Lepler, who had a very long and very rich and very interesting life. He was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, of the Mittler Rebbe, of the Tzemach Tzedek, and of the Rebbe Marash. And I think he even knew the Rebbe Rashab, or the Rebbe Rashab knew him. Kushya, they called him. Kushya, he's mentioned in the Ayem Yem. And one of the many little details of the life of Kushya Lepler, which is recorded, is how he used to go to the Alter Rebbe and hear Chassidus, and he understood. And then a young man, a chassid of the Mittler Rebbe, showed up in town by him in Lepler, where he lived. He was a shopkeeper. And he said a Maamar of the Mittler Rebbe's, and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimarim were much more involved than the Alter Rebbe's, much more involved. And he didn't understand, and it frustrated him. So there's a whole long story about how he made this young man absolutely insane. He had to repeat the Maamar a few times a day, day after day after day, until he finally went to Lubavitch, and he went into the Mittler Rebbe. And he said, I used to go to your father, and I understood the Chassidus, and now I don't understand the word. The expression that he used to articulate this is the following. The Maamar habe ich verstanden, aber den Biur habe ich im Ganzen nicht verstanden. Now, I'm not quoting verbatim. This is approximate, yeah? I understood the Maamar, but I didn't understand the Biur. The Biur means the clarification. In Maamar Chassidus, and this probably is true even of the Maimarim of the Alter Rebbe, the later Maimarim of the Alter Rebbe. But it's certainly true of the Maimarim of the subsequent Rabbeim, that a Maamar would go on a pasuk, or a Maamar Chazal, or on an Inyan, and the Maamar would begin with a series of questions, and then the Maamar would go off on what looks like a tangent, in order to resolve the questions, the beginning of the Maamar, you go off onto a different discussion. And frequently this Yesh Lahagdim Tchila, the tangent, the digression would be more involved. It would be Kabbalistic, it would be philosophical, it would be scholarly, it would be deep. And there'd be a whole biur, a whole clarification on an Inyan in Kabbalah and Chassidus. And at the end of the Maamar, you would say, Valpi Kol Zeh, based on the biur, we're now in a position to answer the questions that were asked in the beginning of the Maamar. So Rabbi Kusiya Lepler, and I'm imagining that he did not create the terminology, that this was the language of the Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, is that they separated the Maamar from the Biur. The Maamar would have been the questions and the answers. In other words, the Gemara, the Pasuk, the Inyan, which the Maamar is wondering about. How do we understand this Gemara? How do we understand this Pasuk? How do we understand this Inyan? And then, of course, the end of the Maamar would be the answers to these questions, explaining the Pasuk or the Gemara or the Inyan. And the Biur would be the digression in the middle. So what we've done in these classes, on many occasions, is we'll learn the Maamar inside out. Learn the Biur first and the Maamar second. The reason to do this is because once you learn the Biur, the connection between the questions and the answers becomes much easier to follow. And like I said, I know and I appreciate that a purist would not do this. He would learn the Maamar straight through, the way the Maamar is written, because if the Rebbe wanted to write the Maamar this way, he would teach it this way. But nevertheless, like I said, Teire he will limud and Eitzarach. I'm hoping that we can learn and understand this. So we're going to permit ourselves this deviation, as it were, and we're going to learn first the Biur and then the Maamar. Okay, so I guess technically speaking, the Maamar itself would be Perek Aleph and Perek Beis and Perek Gimel, and then Perek Yud, sort of, and Perek Yud Aleph. That would be the Maamar. Perek Dalet through Tes would be the Biur. And I'm not even sure yet in what order we're going to learn the Biur, but in all likelihood we're going to learn the Biur in order, going from Dalet through Tes. Like I said to you before, I don't know yet exactly how I'm going to divide this up into shiurim, into pieces, into sections. But we're certainly going to learn the Biur, and then we're going to go back and learn the Maamar. Now let me start from the most important point in this Maamar. This is an incredibly deep Maamar. It's a Haskalah Maamar first class. In other words, people who like mysticism, you're not going to find something more sublime and mystical than this Maamar. This Maamar talks about Eid Ein Sof in its plainness and its formlessness. And the whole idea of Eid Ein Sof being entirely plain and entirely formless and yet having Sfiras in Eid Ein Sof. And the steps and the processes needed to accommodate, in effect, this contradiction that you can be talking about the most pshitos of Ein Sof, the most plain of Ein Sof, and yet there should be Sfiras in Ein Sof. So those ideas are, besides the fact that they're hard to understand, they're very hard to feel, to derher, to visualize, because they're very edel, they're very sensitive. And that's part of the struggle of this Maamar, is simply understanding the concepts that the Rebbe presents. But at the heart of hearts, if you dig and you dig and you dig, and you get down to the grunt, to the yesod, to the very essence, to the very heart of this Maamar is about Jewish people, about Neshamas Yisrael. And of course, if you're familiar with the Rebbe's Torah, our Rebbe's Torah, you know that ultimately it always comes back to Bishvil Yisrael. Or like the Medrash that Rebbe would frequently quote, Machshavton shal Yisrael kodma l'chol davar afilu l'machshavas ha-Torah. The thought of the Jewish people precedes everything, even the thought of Torah. There's this famous Medrash that Eliyahu Hanavi says, Ein yedei mi kodem l'mi. I can't decide what's more important, the purpose of creation, which is Torah and mitzvahs, or those who realize that purpose, actualize that purpose, which is the Jewish people. And after some deliberation, Eliyahu Hanavi says, Omer ani, it is my opinion that Machshavton shal Yisrael kodma l'chol davar. The thought of the Jewish people comes before the Torah and mitzvahs. The ones fulfilling the purpose precede the purpose itself. But when you go very deep into Chassidus, you find it even deeper. That not only is it true that Machshavton shal Yisrael kodma l'chol davar, the Jewish people are more important than Torah and mitzvahs. In other words, that the ones fulfilling the purpose are more important than the purpose itself. But there's a sikha from the Rebbe, from Tafshin Nun Aleph, Parashat Kiseitzi, I think, or Kisaveh, b'melchemes harashus hakosov medaber, in which the Rebbe sort of argues that not only is a Jew more important than Judaism, a Jew is more important than Judaism, notwithstanding Judaism. In other words, if he doesn't learn any Torah and any mitzvahs, the simple reality of a Yid is the deepest inyan. So not only is it true, according to Hasidus, ultimately, that Yidden come before Yiddishkeit, but the idea that Yidden come before Yiddishkeit is an end in itself, not only a means to itself. When you dig deep enough in this Maimed, it comes down to the inherent value, kvayochel, that the Eibishter has in a Yid, in Yidden. What really happens in this Maimed is that the Rebbe presents a question about cause and effect. The laws of cause and effect, of course, are that a cause comes before an effect. A cause has to be stronger than the effect, and the cause has to justify the effect. In other words, you do something because you want it. So your wanting it comes before what you want, and it justifies what you want. And in creation, there are a series of cause and effects, right? As the Gemara says, heaven comes before earth. First, the whole world was covered with water, and then the land rose up, and then there was vegetation, and then so on. There's a sequence, there's a chronological precedence. And in the laws of cause and effect, what comes first in time is a cause, what comes second in time is an effect. But there are different types of cause and effect. There's chronological causality, cause and effect, and there's philosophical cause and effect, and there is principle cause and effect, and so on. In this Maimon, what we're going to find out is that the ultimate cause is the Yid, and specifically the Yid who's a neshama b'guf. The ultimate truth of everything, as far as Hashem is concerned, is a Yid and neshama b'guf that comes from Atzmas Hamuz. And that's the first cause. The first cause of everything is the neshama b'guf. Before there was a Seder Ishtalshalus, before there was an Atzilus, before there was an Ein Seif, before there was a Ratzon, before there was anything, there was a Yid. And the Yid Kvayochel, that the Eibishter envisaged, that the Eibishter consulted, like the Medrash says, that is the basis, that is the first cause for everything that's going to follow, is not some metaphysical Jew, it's not some spiritual soul in some exotic level, but it's dafke, it's emphatically the Yid, Neshama, Beguf, as we understand it, a physical human being on this physical earth. And of course, a physical Yid on this physical earth learns Torah and does mitzvahs, but that's second. The first is the simple existence of a physical Yid on the physical earth, and that's the justice, that's the core, that's the heart, that's the basis, that's the first cause for everything that follows. And ultimately, understanding what I just told you allows us a correct understanding of this entire Maimed. If you miss this initial point, and the way the Maimed is written, it's not written as an initial point, it's written as an ultimate point. It's the crescendo of the Maimed, so to speak. But if you miss this insight, that after you go through all the layers of causality, of cause and effect, and you say A causes B, and B causes C, and C causes D, so ultimately the first cause, which is the basis for all the subsequent causes, A, it comes down to a Yid and a Neshama B'guf. And if we can remember this foundation, it will help us stay balanced, it'll help us stay equal, with equilibrium, as we journey through this very difficult Maimed. And the first thing I want to do is I want to show you this inside. It's on page Reish Pei Vav. It's Peirik Vav. And I'm showing this to you, even though we're going to learn this again when it comes up as we journey through the Biyur on this Maimed. But I just want to start this series of classes by emphasizing very resoundingly, repetitively, the idea that when you approach this unbelievably difficult Maimed, the key to understanding it correctly, rather than getting confused, is to appreciate that the first cause, which means the highest cause, the greatest thing of all, is the Neshama B'guf. And that's the cause of all, the lowest level of a Yid's Neshama is a Neshama B'guf, And this is what the Eibishter envisages, the Eibishter, so to speak, visualizes before all of Seder Ishtalshalos. And all of Seder Ishtalshalos is justified by this anticipation that there's going to be a physical Yid in the physical world doing physical mitzvahs and doing physical birurim and physical tshuva and overcoming physical nisyenis and making a physical deed for Atzmas Musain Sav Baruch Hu B'Tachteinim. But before everything else, it's going to be a physical Yid. And the Rebbe presents it by teaching us the Teres HaMagid. So if you look in Sivav, the second line, the Rebbe says, Hasherish di Yisrael, Sivav, second line, Hasherish di Yisrael, the root of the Jewish people, parenthesis, the Ikir Inyan Sarusa Delatata, which is the basis for the idea that the very phenomena that we, creation, human beings, Jewish people, can touch HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, and get him to react, cause leading to an effect, an arousal from below leading to an arousal from below, above, is Ayidiyah Avidasam Shal Yisrael, has to do with what we do, the work that we do. But the basis for this idea, that what we do triggers Hashem, touches HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is Ba'atzmus. Is the idea that a Yid is one with Atzmus and Hus, with the Eibishter himself. There is a visualization, there is an imprint, there is a hakika of a Yid, Neshama, Beguf, and Atzmas and Hus. And he brings, Ukamesha Kosav Arav Magid, like it says in the Midrash Magid. This teaching of the Midrash Magid, the Rebbe repeated so many times. I almost feel like every Rosh Hashanah the Rebbe would mention this in the Maamar. It's one of the Rebbe's favorite Teiros. You know, the Rebbe had occasions where he would say Teiros each one of the Rabbeim, like Rosh Hashanah, like Yud Shvat, and very, very often when he had to quote a Teiros of Midrash Magid, this is the one he quoted, and it's a very, very serious Teiros. What does the Midrash Magid say? Bepirush Maamar Azal, in interpreting the Medrash that says Yisrael Olu b'machshava, that the Jewish people rose up and the Eibishter's thought. So Yisrael Olu b'machshava is a comprehensive discussion in Chassidus. There's Holem Sheikhim that explain this statement, these three words, Yisrael Olu b'machshava. And in Maamar Chassidus, when they quote these three words, Yisrael Olu b'machshava, they're quick to say the lashon mebechinas al yeinish b'machshava. Yidden entered into the Eibishter's thought, but the meaning of the word Olu b'machshava is the highest madrega in the Eibishter's machshava. There's a Maamar in Reish Nun Zayin from the Rebbe Rashab, which is Vayemu Yeshua Sedech Achar B'Tzurim. I'm almost sure that's the name of the Maamar. And what's important is that the Rebbe, our Rebbe, Zogazun Zayin, repeated that Maamar, I think 50 years later, which would be Tafshin Yud Zayin, I think Pesach, and also the same Maamar, if I'm not wrong. And the Teichen of that Maamar is Yisrael Olu b'machshava. It's really a kitzur of the last 100 pages of the Hemshech Taf Reish Samach Vav, where you have the Yisrael Olu b'machshava is pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed some more. But Yisrael Olu b'machshava means that Yidden enter into Eibishter's machshavas on the highest levels. So the Midrash Magid explains this in the ultimate way. And he says like this. For example, a man that has a son, he loves his son very much, and therefore the visual, the image of his son is carved into his imagination, into his memory. It's branded. In other words, he visualizes his child in the kind of way that no matter what happens, he can never forget him. So Yisrael Olu b'machshava translates the Midrash Magid means that the Eibishter sees Kvayochel, a Yid, and like I said to you before, a Neshama Beguf, and Derech Agav, one of the places where the Rebbe talks about Salat is Take in the Maamar of Tafshin Lamed Ches, at the end of Tishrei, after the heart attack. That the Eibishter visualizes a Yid, but he visualizes the physical Yid. But that's only the first Chiddush, that Hashem's imagination anticipates every single Jew as he is a Neshama Beguf in his Machshava, but then he adds something more. V'kivan, and whereas, since, she'etzla yizbarech ha'ovar v'ha'osid echad, by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the past and the future are the same, loch kei nechaka tzurasam shal Yisrael b'machshavta yizbarech. So when we say that there is a hakika, there is a branding, there is a carving, there's an engraving, there's a permanent memory of the Jewish people in the Kvayochel, in the thought of Atzmus and Hus, says the Rebbe, it's Gam Kedem Shenivru, before they were created. In other words, repeat this in other words, the mashal is that a father sees his child, and even if the child goes off to who knows where, he never forgets. You saw your child, the child is put into your memory, in that part of the memory which is never exhausted, which is never retiring, which is never even diminishes, and you never forget your child. That's the mashal. But in the mashal, there's one limitation. And the limitation is you can't remember a child that's not yet been born. You can only anticipate, you can only visualize a child after the child is born. You have a child, the baby is born. You see how the child looks, you put it into that part of your memory, which is the longest of terms, you never forget it, and you always go back to that image. But Hashem doesn't have time. Hashem is l'mayla min hazman. And by Hashem, the past, the present, and the future are the same thing. So the Mezritcher Maggid says that the Taich Yisrael, all of Machshava is that just like a father visualizes a child, Hashem visualizes a Yid, but because by Hashem there's no Zman, Hashem visualizing a Yid does not have a point when it wasn't. There was never a point when the Eibusher should not anticipate a Yid. In other words, the Yid's place in Atzmos Umhus is before anything to do with world. It's part of Koyachal, the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem visualizing a Yid who doesn't exist until the Eibusher creates a world, and only exists when the physical world is created and his neshama comes into a goof and is able to do a physical mitzvah. But under Eibusher's olu b'machshava, that Yid is always there. In other words, a Yid is connected to Atzmos Umhus on a level which is completely before world. And what kind of Yid? The neshama b'guf. And that's the first cause. That's the first cause. If you want to understand why the Eibusher created the world, so of course we all know the philosophy. In the first Maamar Samach Vov, the Rebbe Rashab uses the expression "K'maimer Rabbeinu" of a taiva is kein kasha. You can't really understand the taiva. And then later on in the Samach Vov, the Rebbe Rashab discusses what he calls Pnimiyas Haratzon versus Chitzenius Haratzon. Pnimiyas Haratzon ha'elyon v'chaftzei ha'amidi. And the Rebbe says that Pnimiyas Haratzon, the inner will of a person, and Kvayachal HaHavdel, the inner will of a lakus, is an inyan atzmi. The Pnimiyas Haratzon of a person doesn't have any reason, any motivation. Their innermost will is them. And the Eibishter's Pnimiyas Haratzon for creation, Kvayachal is also the Eibishter himself. And the way the Maimorim explain it is that there's one Pnimiyas Haratzon and there's innumerable Chitzenius Haratzon. Chitzenius Haratzon means a will that serves the primary will. To give a very simple example, if a person wants a job, are they interested in a job? Not interested in a job. They're interested in money. If a person wants money, are they interested in money? They're not interested in money. They're interested in what money can buy. A person wants what money can buy, they're not interested in what money can buy. They want to live, they want to be respected, they want to be considered honorable citizens. So what does a person really want? In other words, what does a person want in such a way that no matter what happens, no matter where they live, no matter what they're surrounded by, that will never changes? So the simple answer to that question is it's the will to live. And the way Chassidus would explain it, it's the will to take up, to conquer and make their own a piece of this earth, to create space that is their space, which is theirs as opposed to everybody else's, that they're able to fill. Misha ein likarke ein yadam. So Chassidus explains that you have only one primary will, one pnimiyas haras. One will, that will is you and you are that will. Like you have in Samach Vav, who, Shmai u'Shmai hu u'Retzeni echad. He is his will and his will is him. Pnimiyas haras. Only one pnimiyas haras. That pnimiyas haratzon is an inyan atzmi, which means you can't ask why. It's an absolute thing. But in order to support that pnimiyas haratzon, there are innumerable, there are many chitzenius haratzon, and every chitzenius haratzon you can ask why. Because every chitzenius haratzon has a reason, a tam or a tam komas at least. Because every chitzenius haratzon is facilitating, is helping to actualize the seminal haratzon, the pnimiyas haratzon. So what the Mezritcher Maggid is saying, and what this Maimon is going to develop, that when you ask the question, why did Hashem do this and why did Hashem do that, every single one of those questions has an answer in as much as it's chitzenius haratzon. That means to say it's a will which serves another will. Until you get to the ultimate ratzon. And the ultimate ratzon doesn't have an explanation because the ultimate ratzon is hu, ritzeni, hu. And what is that ultimate ratzon? A yid. Natera mitzvahs ayid. And this is what the Mezritcher Maggid is saying. Yisrael olu b'machshava. That even before there was a world, and before there was a neshama, before there was a yid, in the Eibish's machshava kvayach, as Hashem is by Himself, the anticipation of a physical yid on the physical earth doing physical mitzvahs exists, and that's the cause for all causes. That's the ratzon for all ritzainus. So it's of course ironic, right? It's the classic idea that you have in the Lechadedi, Seif Maisa al machshava tchila. The Eibishter creates the world in an order, and the last thing to be created is Eretz Nevras. After Shamayim, the last thing Hashem created is the earth, and the land, and the person. But in terms of Olu b'machshava, Yisrael Olu b'machshava before everything. So the first cause, which justifies all the subsequent causes, is a Yid, Neshama, Beguf, and this is the source of everything, even the source of Torah and mitzvahs. And that's what this Maamar is ultimately saying. That when you want to understand the drama of Seder Ishtalshalos, and the concept of Pshitas and Tzir and Sfiras Agnuzis, and bringing down Pshitas into Tzir, all those exotic ideas of Kabbalah and Hasidus, you must know that where does it start? Ultimately, with the Neshama Beguf. That's the beginning of everything. And understanding that helps answer so many of the questions that this Maamar is going to raise. Now let's continue to read. The Rebbe continues and he says, I just presented you with a Torah of the Mezritcher Maggid on the Medrash Yisrael Olu b'machshava. Says the Rebbe, I want you to know that this is exactly the same idea as another Medrash. The idea that it says in Medrash, B'mi nimlach, with whom did Hashem consult? B'nishmeseim shal tzadikim, with the souls of the Jewish people. When the Eibishter was deciding whether or not He should create a world, there's a pasuk that the Eibishter sat with the Jewish people. There's a pasuk that describes Hashem, a king, sitting and consulting, and the Medrash explains that Hashem consulted with the Jewish people. On that basis, He created the whole Seder Shtalsha. Says the Rebbe, you should know that Medrash. And the Maggid's Pshat and this Medrash are saying the same thing. That the first cause, before everything, is a Yid and Neshama Beguf, and that's the first domino, that's the trigger for all of Seder Ishtalshalos, which comes first in terms of Shamayim Nivru Tchila and Aretz Nivru Ba'acharena, the way it comes from heaven to earth, from a higher level to a lower level. But the real cause for all of Seder Ishtalshalos is what's going to happen at the end, which is a Neshama Beguf, period, and specifically, or in a more comprehensive way, the Neshama Beguf doing Gashmiz Dikatei Mitzvahs. The delight that Hashem will have in the service that tzaddikim are going to do for Him. And of course, the Rebbe always points out, Va'amech kulam tzaddikim, every yid is a tzaddik. Hayagam lefnei abriya, existed before the creation. It existed in, so to speak, in the chakika, in the hard drive of Atzmas Amhus, so to speak. Va'yadei ze haysa abriya, and it's the first cause for the creation itself. And when you understand that the deepest and the highest thing by Hashem is a Yid, Neshama Beguf, you're able to resolve all of the questions that this Maamar is going to raise. Now, of course, it's important to appreciate that Chassidus explains that there is Seichel and Lamaylam and Seichel. There are things that we understand and things that we cannot understand. And when we say that something is Lamaylam and Aseichel, sometimes Lamaylam and Aseichel is Chesed HaMasig or Chesed HaMusig. We don't have the intelligence for it. The ideas are too sublime. But sometimes we don't understand things because they're not logical. They're higher than logic. One of the assertions of Kabbalah and Hasidus, as opposed to Chakira, is that Seichel is a Nivra. Logic is a creation. And when you learn and you understand, you're within the box, you're within the parameters of logic. And when you step outside the parameters of logic, you cannot say why and you cannot say because it's higher than logic. And when you're talking about things that are outside the parameters of logic, you use words like atzmiyistik, pnimiyis haratzen, afatayvis ken kasha, and so on. This idea that Yisrael all over machshava and b'min nimelach b'nivritayim shal tzadikim is one of those ideas. It goes, so to speak, to the truth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, The truth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we understand is beyond our understanding, and it's the basis, it's the trigger for Hishtalshalos, for Torah and for Hishtalshalos. And Torah, in as much as it's Torah, as the Gemara's expression is, Torah can be understood. But there's what's before the Torah, and before the Eibush there's Chochmah, and that's the Neshama. This Rabbi Sai is the first point that I wanted to share in this Maamar, and I will admit that I've dragged it out. I said it, I could have said it in few words, but it's very important to me that I lay this foundation, that we remember it. But this is the Yesod of the Maamar. Now, what's my proof? Having told you that the most important point in this Maamar is the idea of Yisrael Olav Machshava, the Yid Neshama Guf, what's my proof? Or what's the Maamar's proof? So the Maamar's proof is a very interesting one. If you go back to page at Pei Gimel, and you begin to read from Perek Dal, and on this I'm not going to do inside, this I'm going to do Bal Peh. You have a pasuk in Mishlei, which is very famous, and of course it's discussed in Tanya, Perek Menvav, in Al Derech HaAvodah, and in many places in Chassidus. And in this Maamar, which is based on the second Chelek of Hemshech Chaim Beis, it's discussed in a very, very exotic way, in a very lofty way. The pasuk says, "Kamayim haponim leponim kein leiva adam alod." Right, you see in the beginning of Sivdal, the very first line, "Kamayim haponim leponim kein leiva adam alod." What does this mean? As water gives back to the face that looks into it, the face that it was shown, so does a heart of a person give back to the heart that looks into it, the heart that was shown to it. In other words, when you look at water, the water receives your likeness, and then the water gives you back the same likeness that you gave it. And in this Maamar, that's going to be emphasized very, very strongly and repeatedly as two ideas. When you look into the water, you impress upon the water your countenance, and then that countenance comes back to you. You get back what you put in. And the same is true in the meaning of a heart and a heart. That when you communicate from your heart to somebody else, you impress upon that heart what's in your heart, and then that second heart reflects back to you what you impressed on the first, on the second heart. So, in this pasuk, you have a moshel and an imshel. You have an example, you have an analogy, and you have what it's an example for, what it's analogous to. The example is like water mirrors a face, and the nimshel is how a heart feels a heart. And it's a simple pasuk that makes so much sense. It's so psychologically sound, although you can argue that it's not always the case. But this is what Mishlei Maamar says in Mishlei, in Proverbs, that the way you feel to another person is the way the person is going to feel you. Just like when you look in a mirror, you see yourself. When you look into somebody else's heart, you're going to see your heart. If you like that person, that person is going to helplessly like you. If you dislike that person is going to feel certain disdain towards you. If you don't trust that person is going to sense that mistrust and reflect it back onto you. It's a simple idea. As water gives back to the face that looks into it that very same face, similarly, the heart of a person that is shown somebody else's heart, it receives and gives back the same heart, the same feelings. So the mashal is looking into water and seeing yourself, and the nimshal is exposing your heart to somebody else's heart and getting that heart back. Simple, okay? No problems, right? And an avodah level is very simple. And of course, in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe brings this kamayim aponim leponim kein levadim l'adam, and he uses it as a mashal for the reciprocal love of a Jew to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That we have to love Hashem as much as Hashem loves us. And the argument of the Tanya is that since we're so unworthy of His love, and He loves us nevertheless, so our reciprocity has to be in proportion to our lack of worthiness. In other words, the less we deserve His love, the more our love should be reciprocated. But in this Maamar, this pasuk is explained in Kabbalistic terms. And because it's explained in Kabbalistic terms, it becomes very messy, very complicated, very problematic. Why? Because in the pasuk you have a face looking into water, and a heart looking into a heart. And the argument of the Maamar is that they're not the same. Why are they not the same? When a face looks into water, what is water in relationship with a face? The answer is completely passive. Water is not another face. Water is completely plain. And when your face looks into the water in its plainness is not presenting you with a face against the face. It's presenting you with like a mirror. There is nothing other than the face that's shown to it. But when a heart impresses upon a heart, that's one person impressing upon another person. So in the mashal, the face that's being shown to the water and the water reflecting that face back, it's very simple. It's very simple because the water does not have a face from before. So there's only one face, it's only the face of the person looking into the water. So since water has no face, it reflects back the face that was looked into it. But when a heart looks into a heart and that heart mirrors, the second heart mirrors the same thing back to the first heart, that's much more complicated because you're dealing with a person and a person. And when you show your face to another person's face, that person has a face before yours. And because that person has a face before yours, the analogy of the mirror seems to break down. Doesn't work. When you look into water, you see yourself because water has no predefinition. When you show your heart to somebody else, how is that heart supposed to reflect back into you? The second heart is not passive, is not plain. So it's arguably reflecting back where you show it to it as it's qualified, that it's complicated by what that heart emotions are. So it's not a perfect nimshal. And that's part of the complication. And this Maamar, that in the mashal of kamayim aponim laponim, the relation between the face and the water is simpler. And in the nimshal of kein leiv adam ala adam, it's much more complicated. But this is not the problem that I want to raise. What is the Kabbalah of this? The kamayim haponim leponim. So the face is Atzilus, and the water is Ein Seif. Kamayim haponim, like waters are shown a face, and then leponim, they show that face back. The face is Atzilus, Adam Eliyah. Why is Atzilus a face? Because that's what Atzilus is. Atzilus is Adam. Partzuf. What's Partzuf? Image that has a right side and a left side and a center and a top and a middle and a bottom. Adam. Chochmah on the right, Bin on the left, Das in the center, Chesed on the right, Gvur on the left, and so on. So the ponim, the complex face of Atzilus, shows itself to the formless plainness of Mayim, which is Ein Seif, and then it's reflected back on Atzilus. That's the mashal. And the nimshal is Kein Leiv Ha'adam, El Ha'adam. The first word Adam goes on Asiyah, on a physical person. And El Ha'adam goes on Adam Ha'elyon of Atzilus. That Kein Leiv Ha'adam, the physical person, shows his heart to Adam Ha'elyon, to the man above, to the supernal man, which is Atzilus, and then Leiv Ha'adam mirrors it back. So the mashal becomes Eses Sfiris of Atzilus showing themselves to Ein Seif and getting Ein Seif back. And the nimshal is that Adam Atachten, which is a terminology found in Tanya Perek Dal, the human being is called Adam Atachten, the man below, shows his heart to the heart of Adam Ha'elyon and gets that heart back. So what's the question? The question is that when you have a mashal and you have a nimshal, the mashal has to help the nimshal. The mashal is easier to understand. The example, the analogy is easy to understand. And what it is an example for is more difficult to understand. And the mashal helps you understand the nimshal. So one of the questions that this Maamar asks is the following question. What is closer to what? Asiyah to Atzilus or Atzilus to Ein Seif? What is closer to what? Asiyah to Atzilus or Atzilus to Ein Seif? There's a famous expression from the Pardes, which is quoted someplace in this Maamar, that Yesem ish ein areich Asiyah lagabe Atzilus, ein areich Atzilus lagabe Ein Seif. That the distance between Asiya and Atzilus is less than the distance between Atzilus and Ein Sof. And on that basis, the Rebbe asks the question. That even though in the mashal, the physical mashal, it's so simple, right? Water reflecting a face is much easier to understand than a heart reflecting a heart. But when you use the Kabbalistic parallel for this, so a water reflecting a face is Ein Sof reflecting Atzilus, and a heart reflecting a heart is Atzilus reflecting Asiya. And the question is, how could Ein Sof reflecting Atzilus be a mashal, and Atzilus reflecting Asiya be a nimshal, if Atzilus and Asiya are closer, and Ein Sof and Atzilus are more remote? In other words, physically, Kamayim Aponim Leponim is a simple mashal, and Kain Leva Adam Ala Adam is a more sophisticated, a more complex, or more controversial nimshal. But Kabbalistically, it's the other way around. Kamayim Aponim Leponim is less Kabbalistically understandable than Kain Leva Adam Ala Adam. Because Kabbalistically, Kamayim Aponim Leponim means how Ein Sof, Pshitas of Ein Sof, the plainness of Ein Sof, mirrors Sfidas of Atzilus. And Leva Adam Ala Adam means how the Sfidas of Atzilus mirror the Adam Atachte. So the Rebbe says, Atzilus is closer to Asiya than Ein Sof is to Atzilus. So how could Kamayim Aponim Leponim be the mashal and Kain Leva Adam Ala Adam be the nimshal? It should be the other way around. And you know what the answer is going to be? The answer is going to be, and it's found inside, some will say it's Bahavlah, on page Reish Tzadik, in the paragraph that begins with the word Olah Yosef. And what the Rebbe is going to say is that Kain Leva Adam Ala Adam means that Adam Atachten does not only reflect back on Adam Ha'elyon. Adam Atachten reflects back on all of Seder Ishtalshalos, till Atzmas Amhus. Why? Because of the principle of Yisrael Olav Machshav. And ultimately, that's going to be the answer to this question. The question is that in Kabbalah, Kamayim Aponim Leponim is further away than Kain Leva Adam Ala Adam. Because Kamayim Aponim Leponim means Ein Sof and Atzilus. And Leva Adam Ala Adam means Atzilus and Asiya. So how could you use a mashal, which is harder to understand than its nimshal? And the answer is because Kain Leva Adam Ala Adam doesn't only mean how Atzilus mirrors back the Adam Atachten's heart that looks into him. Atzilus mirrors back to Adam Atachten's heart that looks into him. Ein Sof mirrors back to Adam Atachten's face looks into him. Ak mirrors back the face that the Adam Atachten looks into him. Ein Sof Shalifnei Atzimtzum mirrors back the face of Adam Atachten looks into him. Atzmusam Hus Kvayachel mirrors back the face of Adam Atachten looks into him. And therefore it's a proper mashal and a nimshal. In other words, Kamayim Aponim Leponim is actually easier to understand than Leva Adam Ala Adam. Because Leva Adam Ala Adam doesn't only mean Asiya and Atzilus. Leva Adam Ala Adam means that the Yisrael Shalom Machshava, which is B'min Nimlach, B'nish V'seim Shal Tzadikim, which comes absolutely before everything, reflects itself in all of Seder Ishtalshalos. It reflects itself in Atzilus, as a simple understanding is, but also reflects itself in all the levels higher than Atzilus because it precedes them all. Even though in Ishtalshalos terms, in chronological terms, the last thing to come into Metzias is the physical Yid, but in terms of the first cause, in terms of the Seif Maisa Olav Machshava Tchila, the Neshama of a Yid Lamata in Aguf has the first source. And therefore to explain how Sfiris can have an impact on Ein Sof is easier to understand and therefore a mashal. And to explain how a Yid and a Shabbat Beguf Begashmias reflects himself over all of Seder Ishtalshalos, Biz Atzmus and Hussein Sof Baruch Hu, is a much more difficult to understand, and that's the Nimshal. So what I just did was make 2 points. First of all, I argued, I underscored, I emphasized that the heart, the key, the pnimius, the neshama of this maimah is going to be a Yid, a dafka Yid and a neshama Beguf, Yisrael Olav Machshava. Like the Maggid explains, before the child even exists, B'min nimlach b'nish b'seim shel tzadikim. And the second thing I told you is what's going to be the proof. What's going to be the proof that the ultimate first cause is the Yid and Neshama Beguf? And the answer is the Kabbalistic interpretation of the pasuk, Kamayim Aponim Leponim Kain Leva Adam Ala Adam. The simple reading of the pasuk, Kamayim Aponim Leponim Kain Leva Adam Ala Adam, is obvious and self-explanatory. But the mystical kamayim apanim lepanim, kein leva adam al adam, begs to be resolved, and the resolution is going to be is that leva adam al adam is further away than kamayim apanim lepanim, because leva adam al adam includes the relationship between adam atachten, a physical yid in the physical worth, how in the physical world, who is the first cause of all of creation, how he reflects back and inspires reciprocity, inspires a mirroring back to him, not only of Atzilus, but of Ein Seif, and of Ak, and Lifnei Atzimtzum, and so forth and so on. I haven't taught you anything. I haven't read any Maamar, I haven't taught you anything, but I'm going to stop right now. And I guess I'm going to tell you up front that in Mitzvah, the next class will also be an introduction. I'm hoping that at some point we'll obviously start reading text, and we're going to be Yidak with Peirik Dalit. But this is a good Aschala.